All right, let's go. Number 10. The Pool of Siloam. In the summer of 2004, a crew of Jerusalem municipality workers was repairing a broken sewage pipe in the southern end of the city of David, the oldest inhabited core of Jerusalem, a narrow ridge of land between two ancient valleys south of the current old city walls. The pipe ran beneath a private orchard. During the excavation, a worker's pickaxe struck stone steps, wide ones, worn smooth in the way that only happens when millions of feet have used something over many generations. He had just found one of the most important sites in the entire New Testament. He found it because a pipe broke. The archaeologists who took over the site were Ronnie Reich from the University of Haifa and Eli Shukron from the Israel Antiquities Authority. What they exposed beneath the orchard floor was a massive stepped pool, far larger than anyone had anticipated. The pool measured approximately 69 meters in length, close to the length of a standard football pitch. It was formed in a broad trapezoidal shape, with wide stone steps descending on three sides toward the center, divided by flat landings that allowed crowds to move up and down simultaneously. This was not a private bathing installation. The scale indicated public use by very large numbers of people. The dating came from the coins recovered embedded in the pool's plaster and fill. Reich and Shukron found coins from the period of the Hasmonean ruler Alexander Jannaeus, who died in 76 BCE, and from the period of Herod Archelaus, who ruled until approximately 6 CE. That bracket places the pool's primary period of active use squarely in the late Second Temple period, the same era as the New Testament narratives. The pool was in use during the 1st century. It was large enough that every resident of Jerusalem would have known exactly where it was and what it was for. The significance extends beyond the Gospel account. In Second Temple Judaism, ritual immersion, tevilah, was a prerequisite for entering the temple precincts. Pilgrims arriving in Jerusalem for the great festivals were required to achieve purity before ascending to the Temple Mount. The Siloam Pool, at the southern end of the city of David, sat at the base of the stepped street, a broad paved road that led northward and upward to the southern gates of the Temple Mount. Pilgrims would descend into the pool, immerse, and then ascend toward the temple. The pool was not incidental to the religious life of the city. It was part of the circulatory system of pilgrimage. The Gospel of John, chapter 9, describes Jesus sending a blind man to wash in the Pool of Siloam after applying mud to his eyes. The account is specific. A named pool, a specific instruction, a specific location, in a city the narrator clearly knows well. For decades before 2004, the site was marked by a smaller Byzantine-era pool from the 5th century CE, a structure built by later Christians to commemorate the location. The 2004 excavation established that the original, much larger pool lay further south, beneath the orchard. The Byzantine structure was a later monument. The Second Temple pool was something else entirely. When Reich and Shukron completed what the constraints of the privately owned orchard permitted them to excavate, they had exposed roughly 1/4 of the full pool. 3/4 remains beneath the surface. The stone steps John's account describes are still descending into the earth beneath that orchard. The excavation permit, the ownership of the land, and the political complexity of Jerusalem archaeology have combined to leave the majority of one of the most significant water installations in the biblical world still unexcavated, still waiting. The steps go down. The rest is still there. Number 9. The Crucified Man. For most of the modern era, the physical mechanics of crucifixion were known primarily through ancient textual description. Roman authors described it. Greek historians described it. The Gospels described it. The practice was extensively documented as a form of execution, common enough across the Roman Empire that ancient writers treated it as a familiar horror rather than an unusual one. But physical evidence from the bodies of crucified individuals was nearly non-existent in the archaeological record. Crucified remains were in many cases deliberately denied burial, the body left on the cross, exposed. When burial did occur, the evidence that a person had been crucified was rarely preserved in recoverable form. And so the precise mechanics, the exact placement of the nails, the gauge of the iron, the use of additional wooden components, remained matters of inference and debate. That changed in 1968 because of a construction accident in a neighborhood north of Jerusalem called Givat HaMivtar. Workers preparing the ground for construction exposed a series of ancient rock-cut tomb chambers. Vasilios Tsaferis of the Israel Department of Antiquities and Museums was brought in to excavate the site. In one of the tomb chambers, he found a series of limestone ossuaries, The small stone bone boxes characteristic of Second Temple Jewish burial practice, used to collect skeletal remains after the flesh had decomposed. Inside one of those ossuaries, the remains of a young man. An inscription on the box gave his name, Yehohanan. Based on skeletal analysis, he was between 24 and 28 years old at the time of his death. In the heel bone, the calcaneus, of his right foot, there was an iron nail approximately 11.5 centimeters long. The nail had been driven through the heel bone and had struck a knot in the wood of the upright post. The tip bent on contact with the knot. That bend made the nail impossible to remove after death. When Yehohanan's family came to collect his bones for secondary burial in the ossuary, they could not pull the nail free. They took the foot with the nail still through it, wrapped it, and placed it in the box with the rest of the remains. The nail stayed. 2,000 years later, Sepphoris found it. Sepphoris published his initial findings in the Israel Exploration Journal in 1970. He noted what appeared to be a small disc of olive wood between the nail's head and the heel bone, a washer, designed to prevent the nail head from pulling back through the foot during the victim's movements on the cross. The radius and ulna bones of the forearms showed evidence that Sepphoris interpreted as consistent with nailing through the wrist or lower arm, though this aspect of his analysis became more contested in subsequent reassessments. The leg bones showed signs consistent with having been broken. The Roman practice of coryphagium, fracturing the legs to hasten death by preventing the victim from pushing upward to breathe. In 1985, physical anthropologists Joseph Zias and Eliezer Sekeliz published a revised analysis of the remains in the Israel Exploration Journal. Their reassessment refined several of Tzapharis's initial conclusions. They argued, among other things, that the nail had passed through both heel bones simultaneously rather than through one from the lateral side. But the core physical finding was clarified rather than contradicted. The nail, the olive wood disc, the evidence of an execution by affixing to wood. All confirmed. The gospel accounts describe nails. They describe the breaking of legs. They describe specific concern over the disposition of the body after death. The remains of Yehohanan confirm that what those accounts describe was the actual physical practice of the Roman state in 1st century Judea. This was not metaphor. This was the mechanics of what happened to human bodies when the empire executed them by crucifixion. The nail bent on the knot in the wood. His family could not get it free. Those bones have since been reburied in accordance with religious requirements, and the nail was returned as well. What remains is what Sepphoris and Zias and Sekeliz recorded, fixed in peer-reviewed journal pages, permanent in the archive regardless of what became of the physical remains. The data outlasted the bones. The record is all that is left, and the record holds. Number 8. Hezekiah's Tunnel. The account is in 2 Kings chapter 20 and in 2 Chronicles chapter 32. In the years before the Assyrian army of Sennacherib arrived outside Jerusalem, King Hezekiah undertook a series of defensive preparations. One of those preparations was an engineering project of considerable ambition, a tunnel cut through the bedrock beneath the city of David, designed to redirect the water of the Gihon Spring, Jerusalem's primary water source, located outside the city walls in the Kidron Valley, through the living rock and into a pool inside the city. The strategic purpose was direct: deny the besieging army access to water while securing the city's own supply. The 2 Chronicles account adds a physical detail that the author likely did not understand the significance of, that the tunnel was made by cutting from both ends simultaneously, the two crews working toward each other through solid limestone. The tunnel exists. It has always existed, buried and partially forgotten, but present. You can walk through it today if you are willing to wade through knee-high water in the dark for 533 meters. That is the length, 533 meters, through solid limestone, cut without metal tools capable of leaving the precision modern archaeology would demand. Worked with iron and bronze tools, guided by sound and darkness, following what appears to have been a natural fissure in the rock that the tunnelers tracked as a guide. The path curves and winds in a sinuous S-curve that a straight survey from one end to the other would have shortened by at least a third. The decision to follow the fissure was practical. In the dark, with no sightlines and no ability to project a straight line through opaque rock, the natural crack in the limestone gave the tunneling crews a guide they could follow without losing orientation. At the far southern end of the tunnel, approximately 6 meters from where the channel meets the pool it discharges into, a carved inscription was discovered in 1880. The discovery was made by a boy wading through the water channel, the name of the boy was never recorded with certainty, who noticed letters carved into the wall at roughly shoulder height. The inscription became known as the Siloam inscription, 6 lines of Paleo-Hebrew text written in the lapidary style of the late First Temple period, describing the moment the 2 tunneling crews broke through to each other. The inscription describes the pickaxes swinging, the sound of voices coming through the rock as the 2 teams drew close, and the water flowing south through the finished channel to the pool. It is one of the most vivid first-person style inscriptions from the Iron Age ancient Near East. In 1891, Ottoman authorities removed the inscription from the tunnel wall and transported it to Istanbul archaeology museums. The Silo inscription is approximately 1,500 kilometers from the tunnel it describes. The question of precise dating has occupied scholars since the 19th century. The Paleo-Hebrew script was clearly pre-exilic, but script alone does not constrain dating to a single reign. In 2003, Amos Frumkin of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, along with Aryeh Shimron and Joseph Rosenbaum, published a study in the journal Nature using radiocarbon dating of organic matter found sealed within the original tunnel plaster and uranium-thorium dating of stalactites that had grown within the channel. Their results pointed to a construction date in the late 8th century BCE, placing the tunnel's creation within the reign of Hezekiah, precisely when the biblical accounts say it was built. The external corroboration from the Assyrian side is equally precise. The Taylor prism and its companion prisms, all recording Sennacherib's campaigns, date his invasion of Judah to 701 BCE. The tunnel, built to withstand that siege, corresponds in its dating to exactly that period. Hezekiah's name is in the biblical account of the tunnel. Hezekiah's name is on a clay bulla found in the Ophel excavations. Hezekiah's enemy is on 3 Assyrian prisms in 3 different museums. The tunnel connects these sources to the ground. 2 crews cut through 533 meters of solid limestone toward each other in the dark, guided by sound, and they met. The jog in the channel where they broke through, the slight misalignment where the 2 cuts meet, is still visible in the rock. They were off by centimeters after a quarter mile of tunneling in darkness. The inscription they carved to commemorate the moment is in Istanbul. The tunnel is still there. Number 7. The Walls of Jericho. The Joshua account of Jericho's fall has always been the entry in the biblical narrative that invites the most direct archaeological challenge. There is no ambiguity about what the text claims. The walls of the city fell flat simultaneously all around the city in response to a 7-day ritual culminating in a shout. The city then burned. Joshua chapter 6 specifies that the walls collapsed, that the people entered straight before them, and that everything in the city was put to the ban. Nothing looted, everything burned. These are specific enough claims that archaeology can address them, and archaeology has been addressing them inconclusively for nearly a century. The major excavations at Tel Es Sultan, the mound covering ancient Jericho in the Jordan Valley just north of the Dead Sea, were conducted in 2 principal campaigns. John Garstang of the University of Liverpool dug at the site between 1930 and 1936. He identified what he called City IV, a destruction layer he dated to approximately 1400 BCE and associated with the Joshua conquest. Within that layer, Garstang documented collapsed mud brick walls, a significant ash layer indicating fire, and, in a detail he found remarkable, large storage jars still full of grain. That grain detail matters. Cities that fall after a prolonged siege are stripped of food. Starvation is the engine of surrender. A city that falls with its grain stores intact is a city that fell quickly, before those stores could be consumed. The Joshua account explains this by specifying that the city was placed under the ban. Everything destroyed, nothing plundered. A grain store that is full and burned, rather than empty and abandoned, is physically consistent with a rapid total destruction accompanied by a prohibition on looting. Kathleen Kenyon of the British School of Archaeology excavated the site between 1952 and 1958 with greater stratigraphic precision than Garstang had achieved. Her conclusions substantially revised his dating. She placed the destruction Garstang had associated with the conquest at approximately 1550 BCE, rather than 1400 BCE, attributing it to the Egyptian military campaign that expelled the Hyksos at the end of the Middle Bronze Age. More significantly, she found no substantial Late Bronze Age city wall at the site, and very limited evidence of significant Late Bronze Age occupation, the period conventionally associated with the Exodus and conquest narratives. Her conclusions became the dominant scholarly position and were widely used to argue that the Joshua narrative had no historical basis. In 1990, the American archaeologist Bryant Wood published a detailed reassessment in the Biblical Archaeology Review that contested Kenyon's ceramic analysis. Wood argued that the pottery Kenyon had used to date the destruction to the Middle Bronze Age was actually consistent with Late Bronze Age I, around 1400 BCE, rather than 1550. If the ceramic reassessment holds, the destruction layer Kenyon documented falls within the time frame the biblical account requires. The debate between Wood's position and the Kenyon consensus has continued for more than 3 decades and has not been resolved to the satisfaction of a clear majority of specialists. What is not in dispute are the physical characteristics of the destruction event itself, which are unusual regardless of when they occurred. The mud brick walls collapsed outward and downward, piling up to form a ramp of debris that an attacking force could have walked over rather than having to breach. An unusual failure mode for walls that are typically breached by force, applied from outside, which tends to push collapse inward. The grain stores were full at the time of the fire, not depleted. The destruction was thorough and rapid. These features correspond to what the Joshua account describes with a specificity that is difficult to account for if the account is purely literary invention. No comprehensive excavation campaign has returned to Tel es-Sultan since Kenyon's work ended in 1958. The site is a UNESCO World Heritage Property. The arguments continue to turn on the same material that Garstang and Kenyon produced. The walls are still in the ground, still collapsed, still waiting for a definitive excavation that has not yet been funded and permitted. Number 6. The Lachish letters. In January 1935, the British archaeologist James Leslie Starkey was clearing debris from the ruins of the Outer Gate complex at Tel ed-Duer in the Shephelah, the low hill country of southern Judah, roughly 40 kilometers southwest of Jerusalem. The site is ancient Lachish, the second most important fortified city in the Kingdom of Judah after Jerusalem itself, commanding the main road from the coastal plain up into the highlands. A city that appears in Assyrian conquest records, Egyptian diplomatic correspondence, and the Hebrew prophetic literature. Starkey's team was working through ash and burned debris when they encountered 18 pieces of pottery bearing inscribed Hebrew text in ink. The ostraka, ceramic sherds used as cheap writing material, the administrative notepad of the ancient world, had been caught in the burning of the gate complex and fired a second time, unintentionally. The ink was preserved by the same fire that destroyed the building. The ash layer they came from was identified through stratigraphic analysis as the destruction of Lachish by the Babylonian army of Nebuchadnezzar II in 588 to 586 BCE, the campaign that culminated in the sacking of Jerusalem. Harry Torchener, who later adopted the Hebrew name Naphtali Hertz Tursinai, translated and published the letters in 1938. They are military correspondence, dispatches between Yaush, a senior military commander stationed at Lachish, and a subordinate officer named Hosheyahu, posted at an outpost to the north. The Hebrew they are written in is the administrative language of the late First Temple period, direct, functional, without literary elaboration. They are soldiers writing to each other during a war they were losing. The most significant is letter 3. In it, Hosheyahu writes to Yaush. He reports that he is watching for fire signals from Lachish, as he has been instructed. And then he notes, in phrasing that has become among the most cited in all of biblical archaeology, that he cannot see the fire signals of Hezekiah. He is looking for them. They are not there. Open Jeremiah chapter 34, verse 7. The prophet is writing during the final phase of the Babylonian siege. The text records that the Babylonian army was fighting against Jerusalem and all the remaining cities of Judah that had not yet fallen. Lachish and Azekah, the text says, because these were the only fortified cities of Judah that remained. At the moment Jeremiah writes those words, the entire kingdom of Judah had been reduced to 3 points: Jerusalem, Lachish, and Azekah. Hosheyahu's letter says the same thing from inside the military communication network. He is watching for Azekah's signals. They have gone dark. Azekah has fallen, or its signal fire is out, which amounts to the same thing. He is still in contact with Lachish. He is documenting, in real time, the collapse of Judah's defensive network in exactly the sequence the book of Jeremiah describes from the capital. Yigal Usiskin of Tel Aviv University conducted further excavations at Lachish between 1973 and 1994. His work confirmed the destruction sequence in meticulous stratigraphic detail. Iron arrowheads recovered by the hundreds in the debris of the gate complex and along the city wall siege ramp material consistent with Assyrian construction techniques from an earlier siege, and a destruction layer from the Babylonian period showing intense fire throughout the site. The physical record of the end of Lachish corresponds to the administrative record preserved in the ash of its gatehouse. James Starkey did not survive to see the full significance of his January 1935 find established in the scholarly literature. 3 years later, in January 1938, he was murdered near Hebron while traveling to the opening of the Palestine Archaeological Museum in Jerusalem, the museum that would house the letters he had found. The dispatches of Hoshayahu survived the burning of Lachish. They are in the Israel Museum collection. Their discoverer did not survive the road to their publication. The fire signals went out one by one. The record preserved exactly the order. Number 5. The silence of the Sennacherib prisms. In the royal annals of the ancient Near East, silence is data. The Assyrian kings maintained detailed administrative records of their military campaigns. These were not merely archival documents. They were political instruments, inscribed on clay prisms and deposited in the foundations of temples and palaces, designed to declare the king's power to the gods and to history simultaneously. Assyrian royal annals are among the most extensive administrative records produced by any ancient state. They name cities captured, they enumerate prisoners taken and deported, they describe tribute received. They are calibrated to celebrate victory. They are not known for understatement. 3 prisms survive, bearing the royal annals of Sennacherib's western campaign. His military operations in Judah conventionally dated to 701 BCE. The Taylor prism is in the British Museum, acquired around 1830. The Oriental Institute prism is in Chicago at the Oriental Institute of the University of Chicago. The Jerusalem prism is in the Israel Museum. All 3 carry the same campaign record in slightly variant versions of the same cuneiform text. Their account of the Judean campaign is detailed and specific. 46 fortified cities of Judah captured and plundered, a deportation figure of 200,150 people. The administrative precision of Assyrian record-keeping at its most bureaucratic, and Hezekiah of Jerusalem shut up in his city like a bird in a cage, with his territory reduced around him. And then the account stops. Jerusalem is not recorded as having been stormed. The city walls are not described as breached. Hezekiah is not recorded as captured, killed, humiliated in his palace, or any of the other fates that Assyrian annals routinely document for defeated enemies with considerable rhetorical satisfaction. What the prisms record instead is tribute: silver, gold, precious stones, ivory inlaid furniture, Hezekiah's own daughters, his palace women, his musicians, a list of valuables sent after Sennacherib. The prisms suggest as a form of submission payment. But no city taken, no walls entered, no palace sacked. This absence would be remarkable in any ancient military record. In Sennacherib's annals, it is extraordinary. The entire narrative builds toward Jerusalem. 46 cities have been taken. The king of Judah is caged. And then, tribute, withdrawal, no conquest. 2 Kings chapters 18 and 19 provides the account from the Jerusalem side. The Assyrian siege, the ultimatum delivered in Hebrew to the population on the walls, Hezekiah's refusal to surrender, Isaiah's prophecy that the city would not fall, and then the withdrawal of the Assyrian army. The text attributes the outcome to divine intervention, an angel striking down 185,000 Assyrian soldiers in the night. The number has been debated for centuries as to its literal meaning. What has not been debated is the core outcome. The Assyrian army left. Jerusalem did not fall. The Assyrian prisms agree. Not because they say Jerusalem was spared by divine intervention, they say nothing theological at all, but because they failed to record a conquest that the entire structure of the campaign narrative should have culminated in. Sennacherib had every incentive to record the conquest of Jerusalem if it had occurred. His analysts had every mandate to celebrate it. The silence where that celebration should be is the most precisely calibrated evidence the prisms contain. The Greek historian Herodotus, writing independently of both the biblical account and the Assyrian records, preserves a separate tradition about a great Assyrian army that was disabled near Egypt. He describes mice eating the bowstrings and leather equipment of the army's weapons, which reads as a garbled transmission of some other catastrophe, possibly epidemiological. The Assyrian army in the Herodotian account could not fight. Scholars including Ciro Trevisonato have proposed bubonic plague as a mechanism consistent with the ancient descriptions. The precise cause of whatever ended the siege remains contested across the sources. The fact that the siege ended without the city falling is recorded in three separate ancient traditions: the Hebrew Bible, the Assyrian royal annals, and Herodotus, arriving at the same conclusion through three entirely independent lines of transmission. Three prisms, three museums, three silences where the conquest of Jerusalem should have been recorded. The silence is the record. Number 4. The Seal of Isaiah. In 2009, Eilat Mazar, conducting excavations on the Ophel, the ridge connecting the city of David to the Temple Mount, was working through the debris of a large Iron Age building south of the Temple Mount's southern wall. Her team recovered a small clay bulla, a seal impression bearing the name Hezekiah, son of Ahaz, king of Judah. It was the first seal impression of an Israelite or Judean king recovered from a controlled, stratigraphically documented archaeological excavation, as opposed to the antiquities market, where provenance is always compromised by the lack of recorded find context. The Hezekiah bulla was immediately recognized as a major find. The excavation continued. In the same debris field, in the same stratigraphic layer, approximately 3 meters from where the royal bulla had been recovered, Mazar's team found a second seal impression. Mazar published her analysis of both bullae in the Biblical Archaeology Review in the spring of 2018. The second bulla, she argued, bore the Hebrew name Yeshayahu, Isaiah, followed by a partial second word beginning with the letters Nun Vav Yod, which she read as the first 3 letters of the Hebrew word Navi prophet. The lower portion of the bulla, which would have completed both the name and the title, was missing. The clay had broken before the complete impression could be read. But Mazar's reading, if correct, identified this as the seal of Isaiah the prophet, the same Isaiah who, according to 1st and 2nd Kings and the book of Isaiah itself, served as the primary prophetic voice during the reign of Hezekiah. The prophet's seal and the king's seal found 3 meters apart in the same building, in the same destruction layer. The scholarly response was careful and divided. Christopher Rolston, an epigrapher at the George Washington University and a leading specialist in ancient Northwest Semitic inscriptions, published a critique of Mazar's reading of the second bulla, focused on the damaged lower portion. His argument: the surviving letters are insufficient to confirm the reading Navi. The absence of the final letter means the partial word could complete in multiple ways, and confident identification of this as the seal of the biblical prophet is not warranted by what the clay actually shows. The identification, Rolston argued, is possible, but not demonstrable. Mazar, before her death in 2021, maintained that the reading holds and that the physical proximity of the 2 bullae, prophet and king, found together in the same administrative context, was itself significant evidence. What is not in dispute, the physical integrity of the excavation. The Hezekiah bulla is confirmed, provenance documented, royal identity unambiguous. The second bulla is real. The name Isaiah is legible. The title, if that is what the partial letters represent, rests on millimeters of clay that broke before the full impression could be read. The 2 bullae are in a collection. The debate is in the published literature. The critical question, whether the broken edge of a seal impression the size of a large button contains enough surviving data to confirm one of the most significant identifications in the history of biblical archaeology, remains open, suspended over damaged clay, waiting for an analytical resolution that may not be physically possible. Number 3. The burning of Jerusalem. On the 9th day of the Hebrew month of Av, 586 BCE, the Babylonian army, under Nebuchadnezzar II, breached the walls of Jerusalem, burned the temple, demolished the city's fortifications, and deported the remaining population to Babylon. This is the central catastrophe of the Hebrew Bible, the event against which all of Israelite history before it is retrospectively measured, and all of Jewish religious practice after it is permanently shaped. It is also, by the standards of ancient historical documentation, one of the most precisely attested events in the entire ancient Near East. The documentation comes from multiple independent sources simultaneously, and they agree with each other in ways that can be tested against the physical record. Start with the Babylonian Chronicle, a series of clay tablets in the collection of the British Museum, first translated and published in modern form by D.J. Wiseman of the British Museum in 1956 records the military campaigns of the Babylonian kings year by year in administrative cuneiform. One entry records the capture of the city of Judah. It gives the specific date, the 2nd day of the month of Adar, in Nebuchadnezzar's 7th regnal year. When converted to the Julian calendar, that date corresponds to March 16th, 597 BCE. the first Babylonian capture of Jerusalem, which preceded the final destruction by approximately a decade. The precision is remarkable. A specific month, a specific day, a specific regnal year, recorded in a Babylonian administrative document that has survived in the British Museum, corroborating the Second Kings account within the margin of calendrical conversion. Now go to the ground in the city of David. Between 1978 and 1985, Yigal Shiloh of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem excavated a series of buildings in Area G of the city of David. In one of those buildings, a structure he designated the Burnt Room, Shiloh found something that the destruction event had, paradoxically, preserved. The building had burned in the Babylonian destruction. The fire was hot enough to bake the clay boule. Administrative seal impressions that had been stored in the room, the papyrus documents they had sealed, were gone, consumed by the same fire. But the clay impressions, which in normal conditions are fragile and vulnerable to moisture and handling, had been hardened in the conflagration. More than 50 bullae were recovered from the floor of that room, still in their approximate original positions. Among those bullae was one bearing the name Gemariah ben Shaphan. Open Jeremiah chapter 36. Baruch, Jeremiah's secretary, carries the prophet's scroll to the temple and reads it publicly in the chamber of Gemariah, son of Shaphan, the scribe, a member of the prominent scribal family that appears repeatedly in the administrative and prophetic literature of the late First Temple period. Gemariah is a named person in the book of Jeremiah. He is also a named person on a bulla in a museum. He is the same person, the same man who opened his chamber for the public reading of Jeremiah's prophecy about Jerusalem's destruction, had his administrative seal preserved in the fire of Jerusalem's destruction. The second bulla of major significance from the same general context is the seal of Berechiah ben Neriah the scribe. This is, by identification, Baruch himself, Jeremiah's secretary and close associate, whose full Hebrew name was Berechiah, meaning Yahweh has blessed, son of Neriah. The bulla first entered scholarly attention through a publication by Naaman Avagad in 1978. The same year, Shiloh began his City of David excavations. The precise provenance of this particular bulla involves complexities of the antiquities market that Avagad documented carefully. The bulla bears a fingerprint pressed into the clay at the moment of sealing. Whether that fingerprint belonged to the historical Baruch is something the evidence cannot confirm. The name, the patronym, the scribal title, and the period all correspond precisely to the biblical figure. In 2012, Eilat Mazar, excavating on the Afel just north of the city of David, found a sealed destruction deposit, a room that had been buried by collapse and fire before it could be disturbed, preserving its contents in situ. Among the contents were Babylonian arrowheads, iron points, some still embedded in the surfaces where they had struck, recovered from a layer that could only have formed during a military assault. These were not stray artifacts displaced by later activity. They were in context, in a sealed destruction deposit from the Babylonian assault on Jerusalem. The burning of Jerusalem is in the Babylonian Chronicle, in the stratigraphy of the city of David, in the arrowheads from Mazar's Ophel excavation, in more than 50 baked clay bullae, preserved by the fire that destroyed the building they came from. Gemariah ben Shaphan is in Jeremiah 36 and in a museum display simultaneously. He exists in both places, separated only by the fire that ends both accounts, the fire that destroyed his building and the fire that preserved his name on the clay he pressed his seal into. Number 2. The evidence from the Delta. Let us be precise about this entry, because it requires honesty about two things simultaneously: what the evidence at Tel el-Daba actually shows, and what it does not yet prove. The standard academic position on the Exodus narrative is that the physical evidence is insufficient to confirm a mass departure of Israelite slaves from Egypt. No Egyptian text has been found that names Moses, records the 10 plagues, or documents a mass departure of Semitic laborers. No evidence of a large population camping in the Sinai desert for an extended period has been identified. These are accurate statements, and they matter. They are also not the complete picture of what the archaeology shows. Tel el-Daba is a site in the northeastern Nile Delta, in the region of ancient Goshen. The same region the Genesis and Exodus narratives identify as the area where the Israelites settled during the time of Joseph and where they lived during the period of Egyptian bondage. The site has been under continuous excavation since 1966, led by the Austrian archaeologist Manfred Bietak of the Austrian Archaeological Institute and the Austrian Academy of Sciences. It is among the longest continuously running excavations in Egypt. The site is identified with ancient Avaris, the capital of the Hyksos, the Semitic rulers who controlled northern Egypt during the Second Intermediate Period, roughly 1650 to 1550 BCE. What 6 decades of excavation have revealed is a Levantine Semitic population that settled in the northeastern delta during the Middle Bronze Age, in a pattern consistent with immigration from Canaan. That population grew over generations into a settlement of extraordinary scale. Population estimates for the site at its peak phase, the period of Hyksos political control, range between 250,000 and 300,000 people. The material culture of the population is Levantine Canaanite. The burial practices, the pottery assemblages, the architectural forms all reflect a Semitic culture transplanted into the Egyptian delta and maintained over generations without being fully absorbed into Egyptian cultural norms. At the stratum corresponding to the expulsion of the Hyksos by the Egyptian pharaoh Ahmose I, conventionally dated to around 1550 BCE, the population of Avaris disappears. The archaeological signature of their departure is not conquest. There is evidence of Egyptian military activity at the site, but the Semitic Levantine population that had been there for generations is gone before that military destruction. They left. In what numbers, by what route, and over what period of time are questions the archaeology cannot yet answer with precision. But the departure is documented in the ground. A massive Semitic Levantine population in the northeastern Nile Delta, in the region the Exodus narrative names, present for the same approximate period the Exodus narrative describes, and then absent. The Ipuwer Papyrus, formerly the Admonitions of Ipuwer, a manuscript held by the Rijksmuseum van Oudheden in Leiden, acquired in 1828, has been cited repeatedly as a possible Egyptian textual parallel to the Exodus plague narratives. The manuscript describes a series of national disasters: the Nile turned to blood, crops failing, disease spreading, social order collapsing, foreigners occupying the delta. The dating of the papyrus's original composition is debated across a range of several centuries, and scholars disagree about whether it describes any specific historical event. It demonstrates that Egyptian literary culture could produce catastrophe catalog narratives of this type. Whether it describes the same events as Exodus remains genuinely contested. In 2017, a research team led by Verena Schunemann of the University of Tübingen published ancient DNA analysis of Egyptian mummies spanning approximately 1400 BCE to 400 CE in Nature Communications. Their findings indicated that the ancient Egyptian population during that period showed stronger genetic affinity with Levantine and Near Eastern populations than with sub-Saharan African populations. This is a single study involving methodological challenges specific to ancient Egyptian mummification. It is not proof of the Exodus. It is a data point consistent with significant Levantine demographic presence in Egypt across the relevant period. The Exodus question is unresolved. The evidence at Tel el-Deba, the longest continuously running excavation in Egypt, is real. A large Levantine Semitic population was present in the northeastern Nile Delta during the period the biblical narrative describes. The geography matches. The demographic scale matches. The departure is in the stratigraphy. What cannot yet be established with the existing evidence is the precise identity of that population, the specific mechanism of their departure, or the direct line connecting the Avaris population to the later Israelite community in Canaan. The excavation is ongoing. Bietak's team has been digging at the site for 6 decades. The absence of the population they documented is the most thoroughly recorded feature of the site. Number 1. The airburst. On September 20th, 2021, the journal Nature Scientific Reports published a peer-reviewed paper titled "A Cosmic Airburst Destroyed Tal el-Hammam, a Probable Bronze Age City in the Middle Gore." The paper had 21 authors. The lead institutional contributor was James Kennett, a professor emeritus at the University of California, Santa Barbara, specializing in sediment analysis and cosmic impact events. The journal category was geology. The site the paper described was in the southern Jordan Valley, northeast of the Dead Sea. That site, Tal el-Hammam, had been under excavation since 2005 under the direction of Stephen Collins of Trinity Southwest University. It is a large Bronze Age tell, a mound formed by successive occupation layers, among the largest in the southern Levant. The tell's occupation record is continuous for roughly 6 to 7 centuries before a specific destruction event ends habitation, with no gradual transition. After that destruction event, The site shows an occupational gap estimated between 600 and 700 years. No gradual decline. No evidence of siege or conventional military assault. No evidence of earthquake, flood, or volcanic activity of local origin. Occupation, and then absence lasting the better part of a millennium. The 2021 paper presented the physical evidence found within the destruction layer at Tal el Hammam. The evidence requires careful description because the specificity is the argument. The excavation recovered melt glass, material the paper describes as trinitite-like siliceous scoria, formed when silicate soil or rock is heated to temperatures exceeding approximately 1,400 to 1,500 degrees Celsius and then cooled rapidly. The glass found in the destruction layer was analyzed and found to have formed at temperatures the paper estimates at above 1,720 degrees Celsius. For comparison, a wood fire burning at its hottest reaches approximately 1,000 degrees Celsius. A building fire with accelerants does not consistently exceed 1,200 degrees. The melt glass at Tal el Hammam required temperatures that no Bronze Age fire of human origin could have produced. The destruction layer also contained shocked quartz crystals showing planar deformation features that form only under pressures between 5 and 10 gigapascals. To contextualize that figure, the detonation of a large conventional explosive produces peak pressures around 2 to 3 gigapascals at the point of detonation. Nuclear test sites produce shocked quartz. Hypervelocity meteor impacts produce shocked quartz. The destruction layer at a Bronze Age city in the Jordan Valley contains shocked quartz. The paper documents it. Platinum group element anomalies were detected throughout the destruction layer. Elevated concentrations of platinum, iridium, and osmium. Elements rare in the Earth's crust, but enriched in cosmic material. The same elemental signature, present in a discrete stratigraphic layer, is the diagnostic marker of the KPG boundary, the global deposit left by the asteroid impact that ended the Cretaceous period 66 million years ago. Finding the same signature in a Bronze Age destruction layer at a specific archaeological site in the southern Jordan Valley is not a result that conventional fire, seismic activity, or human military action can produce. The paper also documents cosmic spherules throughout the layer, tiny spherical droplets of melted material formed when matter is flash melted and then cools in freefall through the air. These are the physical signature of an explosion that ejects material into the atmosphere. They are found at Tunguska, the 1908 Siberian airburst event, and at other confirmed cosmic impact and airburst sites. They are in the destruction layer at Tal el Hammam, and Salt. The destruction layer and the surrounding agricultural plain show anomalously high concentrations of salt distributed across a wide area. The mechanism proposed in the paper, a cosmic airburst of sufficient energy detonating above the Jordan Valley northeast of the Dead Sea, the lowest point on Earth's surface, a basin filled with hypersaline water, would have generated a shockwave interacting with that hypersaline water and distributing salt across the surrounding plain. The Dead Sea is approximately 34% salt by concentration, roughly 10 times the salinity of the ocean. A shockwave interacting with it at close range and high energy would have the capacity to deposit salt over a significant area of adjacent land. The paper does not claim this is the certain mechanism. It presents it as consistent with the evidence and the geography. The energy estimate for the airburst that could have produced this physical record is comparable to Tunguska-class events, approximately 10 megatons of energy released in an atmospheric explosion. The Tunguska event of 1980 flattened approximately 2,150 square kilometers of Siberian forest. It was not understood scientifically until the 20th century. The object that produced it left no crater. It exploded in the air. The paper does not claim to have found Sodom. The authors are scientists presenting geological and archaeological evidence, and they are careful to frame the geographical identification as a possibility rather than a conclusion. What the paper does establish, based on the physical evidence in the destruction layer, is that a Bronze Age city in the northeastern Jordan Valley plain was destroyed by a cosmic airburst event, that the physical record of that destruction is consistent with a Tunguska-class event, that the destruction was followed by a multi-century occupation gap not found anywhere else in the regional record for this period, and that the geographic location of the site matches the description in the Genesis text of the plain of the Jordan. The Kikar, the disk, visible from the heights near Bethel, close to the Dead Sea, in the region described as well-watered and fertile before whatever happened to it happened. Now the Genesis account. Chapter 13. Abraham and Lot divide the land between them. Lot surveys the Jordan Valley from the heights and sees the Kikar, the disk of the plain, described as well-watered, green, like the garden of the Lord. He chooses it. He settles in the cities of the plain. Chapter 19. Fire and brimstone fall from the sky. The Hebrew text uses language for something coming from above, from the heavens, not from below. The city is destroyed. Everything in the surrounding plain is destroyed. Lot's wife, looking back, becomes a pillar of salt. Abraham, the morning after, looks out from the heights toward the cities of the plain and sees smoke rising from the land, like smoke from a furnace. The geographical description matches Tal el Hammam's location, the northeastern Jordan Valley plain, visible from the highlands, adjacent to the Dead Sea. The destruction mechanism described: fire from the sky, salt deposition, total obliteration, a region abandoned for generations, corresponds to the physical evidence: cosmic airburst, anomalous salt distribution, melt glass requiring temperatures no human fire can reach, and a multi-century occupation gap unprecedented in the regional record. The description of smoke rising from the plain like smoke from a furnace is consistent with what observers at a distance from a Tunguska-scale airburst would have seen. The salt detail, long interpreted as a narrative flourish signifying divine judgment, or as an etiological story explaining the region's desolation, may instead be describing a real physical consequence of a shockwave interacting with the hypersaline water of the Dead Sea at close range and high energy. The author or authors of Genesis chapter 19 were writing, in whatever form the account first took shape, long before anyone on Earth had a conceptual framework for a cosmic airburst. The Tunguska event occurred in 1908 and was not scientifically understood until decades later. The account in Genesis describes, in pre-scientific observational language, the surface-level phenomenology of what a cosmic airburst would look like from the outside: fire from the sky, a city gone instantly, a plain covered in something corrosive, smoke rising from the ground. These are accurate descriptions of what witnesses at a distance from a Tunguska-class event would have recorded if they had witnessed one. The author wrote what was described to them, or what the tradition preserved, without any mechanism to understand what they were describing. The melt glass is in collections at the University of California, Santa Barbara. The paper is in Nature Scientific Reports, Volume 11, Article number 18632, published September 20th, 2021, authored by 21 researchers across multiple institutions. The shocked quartz is documented. The platinum group anomaly is documented. The salt is documented. The multi-century occupation gap is in the stratigraphy. The text that describes this event was written in pre-scientific antiquity by someone who had no framework for understanding cosmic airbursts, in language that describes one. If you want to see more videos like this, click the video on screen now and make sure to subscribe.